بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So today's lecture we will be introducing the concept of the general statement al-aim, and the general statement al-aim is a major part of this sort of block of or this unit of Usul al Fiqh, and it will take us several lectures to cover everything that's in the book, and then after that we'll get into al-khas, that which is specified. So rather than, it's actually just a small paragraph, rather than just sort of read the small paragraph and keep going, I decided that inshallah in this lecture we'll just dedicate it all to, this is like an introduction to what general statements are. So then issue 15, the rest of issue 15, which is quite extensive, just looking at my notes, which is quite extensive, will make sense before we get into al-khas, which is the specifying speech. So we will introduce the definition of a general phrase, what it means, how it's understood, what it applies to, what it doesn't apply to. And then we will look at its proof, the hujjayah of it or the dilala of it. What kind of proof do we get when we use a general statement? And of course, I will try to give examples from the primary sources, but also just sort of generic linguistic examples that Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah has in the text. And we will draw distinction between the general statement as it applies to every single part, al-kulliyya, versus the majority, al-kull, or so there's a difference between something applying to every single part, what we call al-kulliyya, and then something applying in general to the majority, al-kull or al-kulli. So this is something that are terms that are from logic. Usually we discuss them in logic, but they make their way into Usul al Fiqh, and it's important that we spend a little bit of time distinguishing between that. And then lastly, we will look at how general statements, the aim statements that concern people, concern all of the conditions, times, and places of those people, and we'll give an example from a verse from the Quran. Inshallah. So again, this is like an introductory lecture to the concept of the general statement. We'll go very slow in this lecture, inshallah, and I look forward to beginning with you in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, so we'll begin the way we normally begin by looking at the opening lines in the original, and then we'll do sort of the piecemeal translation as we've been doing. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. So Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari rahimahullah, he says, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him and may we benefit from his knowledge in this world and the next. Al-Amu, general statements. Al-Amu lafظ يستغرق الصالح له بلا حصر. A general statement is a phrase that covers what is appropriate to it without limit. So, when you say a general phrase, that which initially comes to your mind without limits is what is the definition of a general phrase. Because if you were to put limits to it, then it would not be a general phrase. So if I said two people came, and I use the muthanna, the dual construct in Arabic language. Well, it's only two people, so it's not a general statement from the point of view that I have limited the numbers of two. But the word people is general, so any two people could have come. So any two people that come to your mind could have come and visited me. So that's sort of what he's trying to get at. So again, a general statement is a phrase that covers what is appropriate to it without limit. There are limiting things like numbers. I gave an example of two, but I chose 5 students in the class or something like that. So we're already indicating that we're specifying the speech. But when we just said the school children as a general concept, but we even say it's a general statement, it's a general concept. Okay, so general statements are phrases that cover what is appropriate to them without limit. Without limit, meaning that which normally would come to your mind when you give that speech, when you hear that speech. So here we're talking about there can be um, mitigating restrictions in your mind. You know, we also have that as part of human speech. But in this case, or the way that we study Usul al Fiqh, we're just talking about in a general, quote unquote, normal situation. You say a word, it's a general word, anything and everything that's appropriated to that word that comes to the normal mind, that's what that word, that means it's a general phrase. والأصح دخول النادرة وغير المقصودة فيه. The correct opinion is that which is rare is included as well as that which is not intended. So he cites a hadith that comes from Abu Dawood rahimahullah about compensation for game animal, and in that hadith he says what would be very rare is to include an elephant in that list. So even if you looked up this hadith, لا سبق إلا في خف أو حافر أو نصل أو نصل. If you look up, it's also in Nisa. If you look up just online a quick search about the tafsir of that hadith, you will see that most of the mufassirun of the hadith will say like camels and cows, right? Because that's what's normal. But it's not restricted just to those categories, because as he said, the correct opinion is that which is rare is included. So that could also be included in that group, and that which is not intended. So the example that he gives, and I apologize, it's a slave example, but in Usul al Fiqh, the slavery examples are very useful because we're always trying to free the slave, but the slave is treated as property because it's bought and sold. So that presents a certain type of conflict. In other words, let me just explain that what that means. If I wanted to buy this pen, there is no assumption that once I buy the pen will disintegrate or will cease to be, right? Like if I bought the pen and the pen didn't work and there was no ink or it was dry, it would be quote unquote defective. That means I would have the right to go back and return the pen. But in the case of slavery, that's not the case. In other words, there are mitigating circumstances. The overarching principle is we're trying to free the slave. So, for example, the example that he gives is if you deputize someone to go to the slave market to buy a slave for you, but there was a slave there that was earmarked to be free, but it wasn't intended that you bought that slave. In other words, the idea is the freedom will always trump the sale. Unlike in pure property, or pure things, material things, the quote-unquote defect or problem of the slave, like if you bought a slave, the famous example in the Sharia, if you bought a slave and you found out that the slave was somehow a relative or a parent or a grandparent or something like that. So the bay'ah, the transaction is sahih, and at that subtle moment then the slave becomes free. You can't put somebody back in slavery after there's a chance to be free. So that's why the example is used. I mean, I know it sounds very crass to say that, but that's why the example is always used, because it presents a predicament from the point of view of violating the default understanding of buying and selling. It's a person at the end of the day, and the Sharia wants to make the slave free. So anyway, coming back to the example here, he says it's not intended. Obviously, when somebody deputizes somebody to buy a slave, he's expecting they're going to come back with a slave. People that are going to work the land, this and that. Not somebody that's going to end up being free, because then he just sort of lost his money. But now we know why that's the case. So, again, why am I saying all of this? Because he says the correct opinion is that which is rare and unintended are included in the general statements. Now, this is also very useful, because when we come to fiqh and interpreting the primary sources, we are not going to just be limited to what we find in the text. So things like alcohol. Naha Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam an kulli muskirin wa mufattirin. This is the hadith of Abu Dawood, rahimahullah. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade us on anything that intoxicates and makes us high. And mufattir is something that kind of gives you a high feeling. So those are type of drugs. So, I mean, in that hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is giving us a general statement. So therefore, we're not limited to sort of date wine and grape wine, which was the type of alcohol that existed at the time of the revelation, but then anything by extension that would create that type of effect. So this definition, I don't want you to think it's like some kind of random situation. No, it's actually very consequential, because we're always going to take what we're learning here to apply it to the Quran and Sunnah. And I know that sometimes Usul al Fiqh seems a little bit obtuse and philosophic, and it is. It's meant to be like that, especially when you're studying a primer like this, which is it's like concentrate. You know, like a juice that's a concentrated juice. It needs to be diluted for you to drink it. It's kind of the same way. So hopefully these classes are a way of diluting it a little bit in a positive way by giving us examples. Okay, so he says, let me just take it from the beginning so we have a complete thought. General statements, or a general statement, is a phrase that covers what is appropriate to that phrase without limit. The correct opinion is that which is rare, is included, as well as that which is not intended. وأنه قد يكون مجازا وأنه من عوارض الألفاظ فقط. General statements can also be figurative, from what is understood from the phrase. Well, let me just take that part, because those are actually two concepts. So the first sentence, وَأَنَّهُ قَدْ يَكُونُ مَجَازًا, that general statement can be from the majaz, can be from figure. So the debate is inside the school of Usul al Fiqh is, are general statements, do they have to be literal, or can they be used in figurative speech? The dominant position is that it can be, وَالْأَصَحُ, I mean that's in the commentary, the dominant position, the more correct position is that it can also be from figurative speech, not just from literal speech. And that's also important because al-aam wal-khas, the general and the specific, are functions of language. So, you know, if you were writing in a figurative way, you can write using figurative language that is general. That's the idea. Why would it only apply to the specific, to the literal, and not the figurative? Is the idea. Let me pick up this point, inshallah, in the next clip. Speech, afwan, the general statements can be figurative from what is understood. Afwan. And the general statement can be used in figurative speech. So the example that he gives, for example, he says, somebody says, جاءني الأسود الرماة إلا زيدا. The lion warriors except Zayd came from me. Well, okay, I mean obviously he's using figurative speech, right? Because the Zayd is a person and the lion is a ferocious animal. So I just have to make a correction in my translation here. So we can use, in the dominant position, we can use figurative speech and create a general statement from the speech. And then he says, وَأَنَّهُ مِنْ عَوَارِضِ الْأَلْفَاظِ فَقَطْ. General statements are results of speech only, not meanings. And this is a debate in the Sunni school of Usul al Fiqh, are the general statements in regards to the meanings, al-ma'ani, or to the alfaz, to the words or to the speech. The speech is the dal, it indicates, and the meaning is what it indicates, al-madlul, al-dal wal-madlul. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine names. We say that Allah ta'ala's divine names indicate the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ad-dalu ala sifat, we say. So Allah, the name Allah, Jalla wa ala. When I write down Allah, that's not God. That's the writing of God's divine name. What is the meaning behind that? The divine essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the name indicates the meaning. So we have the name, or the part of speech, and then the meaning behind that speech. In the dominant position, we are saying that the general statements has to do with the speech, not necessarily with the meaning. It could involve the meaning, But the default understanding is that general statements are a result of speech and not the meanings. Um, when it comes to the meanings, the reason why it's the dominant position is that there can be things that specify the meanings. Um, if I said all men, or if I said men in the room, but I had, then by the speech of it, by the prima facie understanding of the speech that I just said, we mean it's a general statement. But then I have in my mind, I'm selecting a certain type of person. Maybe there's something that I didn't say, or there's a previous statement that I said to which this applies, and therefore there's a form of specifying. Well, that has to do with the meaning of it. Because there could be like a young boy in the room. I mean, well, I didn't mean that young boy, because that's not part of what I actually meant. So there's the meaning and then there's the speech. So it's safer and more rationally cogent to say that the general statements are results of speech, not necessarily the meanings. And then he says, ويقال للمعنى أعم وَلِلَّفْظِ عَامٌ. Technically, now from a technical point of view, istilahan, when we use the technical speech, we say that a meaning is greater, a'am, or lesser, akhas. And when we say a term is general, am, or specific, khas. And this further emphasizes the dominant opinion in our madhab, that the general statements are related to speech, not meaning. So, the speech is the dal, it indicates the meaning, the madlul, that which is indicated. Of the two, which one is greater? The meaning is greater than the speech, because that's why we're talking. We're talking because I'm trying to get across certain meanings to you, not just to just say words. So, we call the meanings a'am. So we say about the ma'na, a'am. So this is a general, or this is a greater meaning, or a khas, a lesser meaning. But when it comes to the article of speech itself, we say a'am and khas. So a'am and khas, general and specific for speech, and a'am wa akhas, greater and lesser for meanings. Some of it's lost in translation, I realize, because we're conducting this in English, but these are terms that you need to know because they are technical terms that are all over, This is a huge topic, which is why I'm trying to go very, very slow, inshallah. Okay, we did that one. Okay, so general statements, let me just repeat in English the part that we just took. General statements are results of speech only, not meanings. Technically, we say that a meaning is greater or lesser, and a term is general or specific, to differentiate between what indicates ad-dal and what is indicated al-madlul. So another reason we give them different terms, other than one is greater than the meaning is greater than the part of speech, is we are trying to differentiate between the two. And as you always hear me say, and probably are sick of me saying it, Islamic law, fiqh, usul al fiqh, is a very precise instrument, extremely precise. So you have to be, these different morphological changes in the word actually have significant type of meaning. If I've ever said to you a couple of words that sound the same and have not told you the difference of the meaning, then that's deficiencies on me. Because every change in the morphological structure of a word in the Arabic language, especially as it uses the Sharia, has a difference. Sometimes one is, al-kamalullah, only Allah Ta'ala is perfect and I do the best I can. But don't ever think that if am and a'am, khas and akhas are the same thing. They're not. There's a difference. One applies to the speech, one applies to the meanings. Why? Because we say that general statements are restricted to the speech part, not necessarily to the meaning parts. And then he says, rahimahullah, وَمَدْلُولُهُ كُلِّيَّةٌ أي محكوم فيه على كل فرد مطابقة إثباتا أو سلبا. Now, the madlul, the proof part of the general statement. We said that the general statement involves everything that comes to the mind when we say that statement. So he says, rahimahullah, its proof is over all of the parts. Kulliya, and this is now I'm going to give you from the commentary, not just a majority, al-kull, or a generality, al-kulli. And then he says, let me just take that part. Its proof is over all of the parts. So in logic, we have a difference between al-kulliya and al-kull. Here again, two different words. Al-kulliya means every single one. So if I say, what does he give an example? If I say, using the kulliya structure, give all of the children a chocolate. I mean, every single child, let's say we're in a school setting. I'm like the principal of the school, said, give all the children a chocolate. Then that means every single one, whether they be good students or bad students, whether they pre-present or absent, whether they be old or they be young, because it's a kulliya, it means every single one. Versus al-kull, which means a majority. So if I said kull, every, كل رجل في البلد يحمل صخرة العظيمة. This is an example that he gives. Every man in the town carries a heavy stone. But I used kul, every meaning the majority of men, not every single person. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was a Taj al-Subki, the son. I think it was the son, not Taqi. Allah, I could be and Allah forgive me if I'm wrong. Wrote a little risala on the word kul. So the way I say it is that every does not mean every single one every time it is used. Let me end with that, and I'll pick up what I mean by that in the next clip, inshallah. So I ended by saying this funny thing about every. Every, the word every or kul, doesn't mean every single one every time it is used. Because sometimes it could refer to every single one, as in the general statement, which we're talking about, al-am. Al-am means that the conditions of whatever that general statement go to every single individual part. For its madlul is kulliya. Its proof is over all of its parts. But the word kul means the majority. So the example that he gave in the book is that every man in the town carrying a heavy stone, meaning the majority of them. And it does not mean kulliyan. So kul and kulliyan are different from kulli. So afwan, I think I messed it up. Al-kulliya is what we're talking about, is in the general statement, the meanings are in every single one. That's al-kulliya. And then opposed to that we have al-kull and al-kulli. Al-kulli is, I'm translating it as general. So the example he says is somebody said that men are better than women, which, is a problematic statement, obviously. But if men are better than women, in general, that's what he means. Because there are women that are better than men, like Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam, or Lady Khadija alayhi salam, or Asiya alayhi salam, or Maryam alayhi salam, the mother of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, ala nabiyyina afdal salatu taslim. So al-kulliyan in general is not paying attention to the specifics. So if you said a general statement, you mean generally speaking. We say in English, generally speaking, I don't like seafood, but I love shrimp. right? That would be so generally speaking, not every single item of seafood I don't like, but in this case, but I do like. I just made that sentence up, by the way. So that is not what we're talking about in the general statement. In the general statement, the I'm statement, we are saying that its dilala is kulliyatan, meaning that it is on every single individual part. So its proof is over all of its part, not just a majority or a general, and it's over all of its parts in command and prohibition. So whether you're affirming something or negating something, whether you are commanding something or prohibiting something. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibits us from doing a general act, meaning every single time or instance of that act, right? You can't be, I avoided it once and therefore I can go to it again. I fulfilled the prohibition. I stayed away from the haram act once. La, you have to stay away from it all the time. Now you see kind of why we have this way of speaking. Okay. I feel like if I keep talking about that, I'm going to get everyone confused. So let's just leave it there and keep going. وَدَلَالَتُهُ عَلَى أَصْلِ الْمَعْنَى قَطْعِيَّةٌ. Its proof with regards to the original meaning is absolute. وَعَلَى كُلِّ فَرْدٍ ظَنِّيَّةٌ فِي الْأَصَحِّ. And its proof with regards to individual parts is not absolute in the dominant opinion, as there could be particularization. So, again, the dilala of it, the proof in this form of speech, is with regards to the original meaning, the general meaning. But when it comes to the specific meaning, it's not absolute. Why? Because there could be a form of takhsis. There could be a form of particularization that we are not privy to yet. So, here you kind of see the elegance of the argument, I hope, inshallah, is that we have a general statement. We said that it encompasses everything that comes to the mind, whether it be figurative or not, whether it be intended or not, whether it be rare or not. And we said that that meaning applies to every single one. But when it comes to the proof of its meaning, its proof with regards to the original meaning is absolute, the conceptual idea. But when it comes to the specific every single part that we're saying, that proof over those single parts is not absolute in the dominant opinion, because there can be a specificization, a specifying of that. And the specifying al-khas will come in a couple of lectures in this unit, but in a couple of lectures when we talk about that. Now, of course, this is debated because, you know, the way that he phrases it. Let's see if he gives an example here. Well, you know, one of the famous statements of the of Usul al Fiqh is there's no am except that it has been made particular, has been made khas. And one of the ways you can define the am, the general statement, is that it could theoretically be particularized. So the particularization, that's why al-am and al-khas, even when we talk about, we say al-am and al-khas back to back, you can't talk about one without the other. And because of that reason, because there can be specifying texts, concepts, precedents, qiyas, whatever, ijma', whatever the case may be, we can't say that the am applies absolutely to the individual parts. Why? Because then we're locked into a meaning. Well, but the am by definition means that it can be specified. So if I locked, that's why it's the dominant opinion. If I locked in by saying the am is, its proof is over its original general meaning and its individual parts, then I've not allowed myself the opportunity to specify. But I have to be able to specify, because one of the definitions, I mean, he didn't say it here, but I'm telling you, one of the definitions of the am, of the general, is that it can be specified. So let me just read that last sentence back to back. Its proof with regards to the original meaning is absolute, and its proof with regards to each individual part is not absolute in the dominant opinion, as there could be a particularization. And then the last things that he says, rahimahullah, وعموم الأشخاص يستلزم عموم الأحوال والأزمنة والأمكنة على المختار. And he says, general statements concerning people necessitate all conditions and times and places in the chosen opinion. So the example that he gives is Surah At-Tawbah verses 5, فَاقْتُلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ, and fight the polytheists. That's a general statement. Al-Mushrikeen is a general word, and because it's dealing with people, it means in all time, places, and circumstance. That's the default. But we know that there is takhsis, because there are dhimmis. The dhimmi is a particularization of the mushrik. In other words, from a theological point of view, people of other faiths, even though we coexist with them and we work with them and all of that, from a theological point of view, we do not hold that their aqidah is like our aqidah. It's not sound. There are polytheistics or anthropomorphic parts of that, but they are a subset that has been particularized away from this verse. You cannot fight the dhimmi. If anything, the Prophet ﷺ said, I am the whoever harms a dhimmi in this world, they will have to face me, or something, ma ma'na, yawm al-qiyamah, or he will be the advocate of the dhimmi, afwan, alayhi salam, yawm al-qiyamah, which is a huge statement. So the dhimmi, or the mu'ahad, or the person who has a treaty with us, or with a Muslim state, even if they be polytheists, even if they express animosity towards Islam and Muslims, but they have peace, they're carved away. So here you see how the last sentiment is that the general statement applies to the general meaning, absolutely, but not necessarily to the particulars, because there can be a particularization. So in this verse, فَاقْتِلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ, the default understanding is in all times, places, and circumstances. However, there are particularizations in 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And as we say in Arabic, halum majarra, so on and so forth. Okay, so let me read that last sentence again. General statements concerning people necessitate all conditions and times and places in the chosen opinion. So another way of looking at it is when it comes to, when Allah Ta'ala tells us to pray, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ, all the time, in all places, in all circumstances. And there are no circumstances where you don't pray. I mean, even if you can't move your body, or you can't make wudu, you make tayammum, you pray with your eyes, or, even the hadith of the Dajjal, when the times of the day and night and the astronomical signs that we use to conduct our liturgical life are broken, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Iqduru lah." You have to calculate and allot for that. So there are no times where we don't pray. So this is an example where it applies all the time. Okay, we'll put a pin in it here. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, in today's lecture, we took like the introductory remarks of the general statements. This is before we get to issue 15 that's in the text, where he's going to get into like a lot of the words and phrases and things like that, which was a little bit complicated. So I wanted to provide this as an introductory. So we did very little, it's just a paragraph, but I went super slow. So we looked at general statements, how they cover what is appropriate without limit, how they include that which is rare and unintended. We gave examples for that. We talked about that it can be figurative. We said that the general statements are results of the speech and not meaning, and we spent a lot of time talking about the differences between the speech, the dal, and the meanings, the madlul, the indicator and that which is indicated. Related to that, we said that when it comes to meanings, we say that the meaning is general, often the meaning is greater or lesser, a'am or akhas, but we say that the term is general or specific. And this is another way of bifurcating or differentiating, I should say, between the speech and the meanings of the speech. And then we read and we looked at that the proof of the general statements is kulliyan. It goes to every single one, not the majority, the kull, or not a generality, a kulli. It's kulliyan, kulliyatan, and even though those are terms from logic, I tried my best to give you examples of why that is significant and important. Then in the last clip, we looked at the general statements. The proof of the general statements are regards to original meanings. That is absolute, but not necessarily to the specific parts, because there can be a particularization. And then I introduced this concept that a definition of any general statement is that it can be particularized. And the reason we have the general statement is to show that it can be particularized, even if it's just theoretically particularized. That's how we know that it's a general statement. If you can't particularize it, then it's not a general statement. It's sort of kind of like the nature of it. So therefore, it does not, the proof of it does not go to each single one by default, because there can be a particularization. And then lastly, we said that general statements concerning people necessitate all conditions, times, and places. And we gave examples of why that's the case. But we also will also always look out for particularizations. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.